evening and welcome to Sitar Arts Center's Salon Dialogue about the arts and emotional well-being with artists, therapists, researchers, and advocates. This evening, we will discuss improving mental health through the arts, practices, and experiences, especially in the context of the COVID-19 world that we find ourselves in right now. I am your moderator, Karen Robinson-Ogbebor of ABC7. I'm also on Sitar's Leadership Council. So on behalf of our team and tonight's host, I welcome each of you. To help us get started, please take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat by choosing all panelists and attendees. Also, feel free to share stories about how art has positively changed emotional well-being for yourself or someone that you know, or share how you are coping in our current climate. I would love to share while you are entering your personal information and share about I thought of two things. One, as a kid, skating was a primary artist expression for me. Each summer, skating was, I skated from sun up to sundown, and my skates were the shoe of choice. Skates transported me to another place. I felt invincible. I felt like, a free-flowing bird taking flight. And it wasn't until I stepped down out of those skates each day onto the cold floor that I finally stepped back into reality, knowing that just around the corner was the next day and I would be able to start that all over again. And I liken it to painters stepping away from their canvas or ballerinas exiting the stage. My current escape is adult coloring books. It's like mental medicine for me. I am instantly able to be laser focused and create something that to me is worthy of framing. And so I have been doing that for quite a while, and certainly during this time of our being in a pandemic. So tonight, this evening, we'll explore why practicing and collaborating around the arts can be transformative for people experiencing mental health issues and injuries to their socio-emotional well-being, especially in response to trauma or systematic barriers, pardon me. Oh, I'm excited. But first, I'd like to pass the baton to Sitar Arts Center's Executive Director, Lorraine, so that she can introduce a very special treat. And please, don't go away. There's more to come.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for being with us tonight and being such an able host of our Salon series. Welcome, everybody. I'm Maureen Dwyer, the Executive Director of Sitar Arts Center, and I am very excited and hopeful about tonight's discussion. It was really interesting to see in the chat that we have visitors from many different states and cities. And so I can't assume that everybody knows what we do here at Sitar Arts Center. So I'll give you just a little snippet of our mission. If you haven't been to our neighborhood, Sitar's in the Adams Morgan neighborhood of Washington, D.C., which is a very vibrant and diverse community. And it's literally an artistic home for youth and for children of all ages up through adulthood, young adulthood. And they come from every ward in the city to connect, to create, to contribute through learning and their self-expression and collaboration in the performing, the visual, and the digital arts. Our vision and hope at Sitar is that every child, not only in DC, but in the country, is able to discover his or her intrinsic gifts, that they have the educational opportunities needed to transform their gifts into passion and purpose. So we work to confront the historic and systemic barriers that prevent that from happening. We built kind of a laboratory of sorts on the corner of 17th and Calorama in Adams Morgan, where we explore and form a loving community. And we have a mandate that 80% of our students come from households earning 60% or less of the median income, and thereby we're removing the financial barrier from discovering one's gifts and passions. At Sitar, they use the arts to discover who they are and to grow into engaged, change advocating adults and really confident citizens of the world. When life was in 3D a couple years ago, I was at our juried art exhibit that we host every year in our gallery. And I was looking at the winner of the student category, the youth category, a 16-year-old artist, Claudia. And she came up to me because she saw me kind of peering at it. And I said, this is such a beautiful piece. And it was a portrait and it has so many different elements to it. And I just can't tell what you made it from. Can you explain? And she said, well, actually, I face a lot of depression. And sometimes when I'm really depressed, it's really hard for me to leave my room. So this canvas has on it whatever I had available to me in my room during a very depressed period. So she started pointing out, this is a little bit of acrylic paint I had left. Over here's some nail polish. That's a magic marker. And she just used what was in her room to express her heart and soul and create a beautiful piece of art. And it reminded me of just how vital Sitar's mission is and the arts are. And as we have faced the pandemic, that story has occurred to me over and over, which is why Sitar immediately got up and running online and got going, because we realized that we cannot allow our students to not have the self-expression. Because while I was so sad to hear that Claudia had faces mental health issues, it relieved me to know that she found a way to cope through them by expressing herself.
So we will transition now and start our conversation with experts that will lean in to varying different topics related to the arts and emotional well-being from a neurological perspective, from art transforming lives and communities, to art therapy. Jill Sonke. She is a dancer by training, and Jill is the director of the Center for the Arts and Medicine at the University of Florida. She's also the U.S. Principal Investigator of the EpiArts Lab. The EpiArts Lab was started in the UK, and studies show art engagement is associated with better mental health, lower risk of depression, reduced loneliness, fewer childhood adjustment problems, and enhanced health behaviors. Look forward to hearing more about that. And we also have with us today, I would love to welcome Gordon Davis. Gordon is a poet ambassador with Free Minds, a book club and writing workshop. Gordon mentors and provides leadership, offering advice and tactics to help others in the community cope with issues using the power of creative writing to heal. Gordon's story is an extraordinary journey. He pushed through adversity and overcame great challenges. He pays it forward by giving back. And he attributes much of his abilities to move forward because of the written word. Additionally, you should know that in 2000, Gordon received his GED. In 2013, he received his bachelor's degree in literature. 2015, he earned his master's in professional studies. And he was accepted to SUNY Albany this August, when he will pursue a dual graduate program in social work and public health. Welcome, Gordon. We also have Joy Nierenstein Radish. Joy is a creative arts therapist, licensed drama therapist, yoga educator, and founder of Joy Works NYC. A lifelong performer, Joy brings a variety of tools to her work at the inpatient psychiatric ward and in private practice. Her work centers around healing trauma, restoring creativity, and self-expression. As an artist, she views psychotherapy and healing as the ultimate creative practice. So let's begin. But first, allow me to share a few of the format for this evening. We'll spend about 30 minutes exploring topics with the panel and conclude with a Q&A. You will find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please post your questions in the Q&A box versus in the chat. Indicate the option to have someone read your question or to read your question out loud yourself. And if you're directing your question to someone specifically, let us know who that person is of our panel. So, Jill, Gordon, Joy, welcome. Let's jump right into the conversation. So the first question is for all of you. Tell us how arts have kept you uplifted. And while in this past year, what kinds of things have you done to offset the situation that we find ourselves in? Any new things that you're doing related to the arts? And I would love to start with Jill, because I think I know the answer that she will give, and I think it's a great start. Jill?
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. Yes, we had a great conversation prior to the program today, in which I shared my little personal renaissance that I've gone through since COVID. Actually, it started just before COVID. I started singing and playing music, and this is really extraordinary for me because I'm a dancer by training, and I'm also a person who has mouthed the words to happy birthday my entire life to spare everyone around me, because I've always just felt like I could not sing. I'm not a singer, but I've loved music, and I've especially just adored harmonies in music. And it was probably 6 months before the pandemic. I was with friends who were singing, and I just was enjoying it so much. And I just had a moment of liberation and asked them if I could join. And I warned them that I would just make noise, but that I would be joyful. And they were so generous in letting me join them. And that really was a major turning point in my life. I mean, I don't think I exaggerate when I say that, because now I've been playing the guitar. And I play the guitar and I sing every single day. 4 or 5 nights a week, I sing and play outdoors with friends and with family. My son is an incredible musician. It's been an amazing joy for us to play together. And I stop between meetings and I play one song, and it's absolutely transformative and transcendent. And it just feels extraordinary to have discovered a new art form at this stage of life, and to have had this relationship to music and this ability to transcend and use music for my self-care during this pandemic year, which has been so challenging.
I applaud your bravery, and I think no time than now to do something that you wouldn't have normally done. So I just thought that was so great, that something that you would have never thought to do became the thing that you're doing every day. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Gordon, how about you?
Good evening, everyone. I have always used literature as, the vehicle that helped me navigate life. And it's always been something that, gave me an opportunity to understand the world that I never was familiar with. And so I learned a new aspect when I got connected with Free Minds of poetry. And poetry was the vehicle that allowed me to express myself during my hard times. And I realized that this is a vehicle that can be used for numerous people and for different reasons. And so, especially now in today's society, our pandemic era, I started to show others, like a lot of youth that I've been in contact with, showing them the ability that poetry has and how to use it as a vehicle to express themselves, but also to use it as a vehicle to travel. And I've been teaching people recently how to express themselves through poetry and what poetry can look like, especially now. And it's more like radicalized because I try to show people that poetry is not a set format, and you can actually use it to, express your outrage. You can use it to express your happiness. You can use it to express many things, and you don't have to stay bounded to one situation. So I've been getting to teach people poetry, and I see the success and I see the growth of individuals. And this is something now that I said I will continue to pursue and continue to teach people because I find it, and also as people explain to me, that it helps them, cope with the pandemic, the isolation. It helps them reconnect with something of humanity because it not only helps them express themselves, but the fact that I'm reading it and others reading it, it now connects them in a way that it wasn't connected to humanity before. Our society has been split apart to a point where people no longer know how to interact. So now this becomes the new form for them to interact with others. And I find that it's a great thing, and it's a beautiful process in a way.
Thank you so much. And the fact that you pay it forward by mentoring others and helping them, gain access to something that they probably hadn't experienced before is really, really powerful. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Joy, how have arts experiences or practice helped you, help your well-being this past year?
I feel like I have a little bit of a different experience in terms of time this past year because I was an essential worker throughout the pandemic. So the arts practices that I normally kind of brought into work at the hospital, I feel like kind of accelerated to 100 miles an hour because there was so much more like what we call recidivism in terms of patients returning to the inpatient psychiatric unit. So much isolation, so much depression, so much trauma. And it's something I think because we were talking about coronavirus all the time and essential workers being on the front lines, we also were kind of on the front lines in this quieter way, dealing with these wider issues and people's mental health struggles. So for me, I found that it was actually my role as a clinician, my role as a drama therapist that really shifted, that I had to learn how to hold in a different way, that I had to learn how to support in a different way. And it was so heartening to watch There'll Be Sun because I was also, the other work that I do therapeutic theater work, which is different than psychotherapy work. And so right in the middle of the pandemic, the work that I've been doing the past couple of years is like this intergenerational storytelling between Holocaust survivors and high school students. So right in the middle of the pandemic, I was directing a play with the high school students performing the stories of the Holocaust survivors. And when everything got shut down, we also had to make that decision in saying, well, what are we going to do? These stories feel so important. There felt like a hunger to tell them. And so we also went virtual. So I feel like in terms of my art practices, it was really my role as a clinician, my role as a director that just had to shift and change and expand this year.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And, and watching the piece, the video that we just watched, it reminded me specifically of being in their shoes and trying out for a play or being in a play. And I think everyone can relate to, performance, whether it's in a formal setting like that or just, with your family and the drama you may bring in those situations. So I think it's exciting that, to learn more about using the kind of therapy that you are doing with your patients. So thank you so much for sharing that. So, and before we move on, I want to acknowledge that Bonnie, Julie, Colin, and Rhonda, and a few others that I may not have seen all posted about some of their specific interests right now during the pandemic, from music, singing, writing poetry. There's a jazz vocalist, Rhonda. And so thank you for sharing that. It may give some of us ideas about new things to try. So I like that. Now, I want to go back to Gordon. And Gordon, can you share more about Free Minds and your journey with them? You know, reading poetry and helping people is something that you have been doing now. And I'd love to know more about what does that mean? And maybe you can, I have a vision of what it is, but maybe you can, you know, expand upon that and give us some examples perhaps.
Well, Free Mind was birthed. Free Mind is a reading and writing workshop, but it was birthed in 2002 from a strong relationship with a young man who was on death row, and he was executed in 2000. And the founder, Kelly Taylor, she had a good relationship with this young man, and she was sending him books and helping him thrive with education. Knowing he was in a state of despair, she still provided the support and comfort to him. And this helped him, you know, have his final days at a state of peace. And so once he was executed, Kelly and Tara Lieber, the other founder of Free Minds, they decided that education is something that these youth need while they're incarcerated. So they started the reading workshop as a bi-daily basis for the DC jail. And when they realized that in this process, people would get children being released, or they were sent to federal prisons because DC is not a state and don't have a prison. So members was going all over the United States. And so they wanted to know, like, and how can we stay in relationship with these people? Because we awaken something in them and we need to further that information and that knowledge and that drive and that education. So now they expanded their vision. So now Free Minds become a reading workshop for DC jails, federal prisons, detention centers, and they continue the support of these individuals again once they get released, because Free Mind also now becomes a reentry force that teaches them job readiness. You know, they give them peer support. You know, they help them with everything parts of living. So Free Mind is not just, you know, a reading and writing workshop. Is more of a family now. This is what we call it. This is how those of us who are part of it, we look at each other as brothers and sisters. This is our connections that we made through this vehicle called Free Mind. And so I got introduced to Free Mind from a good friend, which actually was one of my professors. Her parents did something with Free Minds, and Free Minds sent them a book. And the book that they sent is a book of poems written by incarcerated men. And once I read this book, and I was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for all these years, because I couldn't figure out how to express myself and get my voice heard. And so once I got that book, I wrote Free Minds, like, I don't know what y'all doing, who y'all are, but I want to be a part of it. And I know y'all in DC, I'm in New York. How can I be a part of it? And they welcomed me with open arms. And they started sending me books. They started encouraging me to write poems. I never wrote poems before. And so they encouraged me to write poems, and I sat down and started writing poems. And I used to send the poems back to Free Minds. And what they do is they have what they call Write Night. And Write Night, you have a bunch of volunteers. They actually read the poems of individuals that's incarcerated, and they comment on the poems. And now these comments become something that the individual who is incarcerated, it becomes the world, it becomes everything. Because not only now you are expressing yourself through poetry, but you're getting feedback from individuals you don't know. So me, I didn't have any family. I was in a state of loneliness. And so once I started getting these comments back on my poems, and they like, not just, hey, that's a good word you use or a nice sentence. No, I felt something when I read this. Oh, this touched me in this way. This reminded me of this. And those words spoke to me. And it's like, I was so overwhelmed by love. I felt the love from these individuals as if I knew them my whole life. And that became a thriving process for me. It became something that I wanted to now continue for others because I saw what it can do. And so once I got released in May 2000, first thing I did was try to contact Free Minds. I wrote everybody I could find on the internet. I'm home. How could I get involved? And everybody showed their love. Once they found one person found out, everybody started writing and let me know where they at, how can I be involved. And we also have on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, it's called the Build Up Hour, where everybody from Free Miles who was released are on Zoom, and we all come together. How's your day? What you've been up to? What you need help with? This is the family. And this is something that, continues the growth and development of individuals. And it also helps you continue your push. And so just that love alone, it makes you understand that the job is never done. You must continue to go on. And so like I understood what poetry did for me and how it allowed me to express myself and make it out of that state of despair. I began to push the same notion, the same ideology, the same drive. And I speak with many individuals through Free Minds, through my own travels and journeys. And I always promote education, because education is the vehicle that I used to survive while I was in prison. And poetry is the vehicle I use to express myself with the education I had while I was in prison. So it works as a collective unit. And this is how I now try to take that to communities that don't know these vehicles exist because no one ever told them. And so I try to help people see that there's a bigger light, there's a light at the end of that tunnel, because your predicament doesn't determine who you are. And this is
Exactly.
our push.
And I think, the whole thought of no matter how restricted your space is, that you can escape with your mind through reading and poetry. And so it's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so Joy, I have a picture in my head of drama therapy. And I'd love for you to help me understand who are the best candidates for this drama therapy and how does it play out with your participants?
Sure. I guess the answer to the first part of your question is that human beings, period, are the best candidates for this type of therapy. Because I think, like any of the arts, drama, role-taking, finding kind of a space outside of the space of regular life to engage in new behaviors, to take on the energy, the story of somebody else, is something that I think human beings have been doing since the beginning of time. And I think it's true for the other arts and other arts therapies as well, for music as well, for dance and movement as well. So drama therapy, I think sometimes a way that drama therapists like to describe our work is that if we break down the word, drama, or draw, I guess the first part of it actually means to act, to take action. And as humans, we're always making choices, we're always taking actions. And so a way to kind of use theater techniques in therapy in general is to do an assessment of the roles that we've been playing in our life, the actions that we've been taking. Do those actions feel like they are dynamic? Are they helping us expand, or are they keeping us stuck in a box and feeling very rigid? So in drama therapy, we use different techniques to explore kind of that very thing.
Is there any quick thing that you might be able to tell the audience about how they might be able to replicate some kind of exercise in their home? Is there anything?
Sure. It's a really fun question. And I would say, first of all, to replicate it, the first thing is just to give oneself the permission to be spontaneous and to play and to not have to have a right answer, because whatever comes from within, that is the answer, that is the best answer. But something that I think is applicable and kind of transcendent for everybody is to say, okay, take a moment and look within for a second and think about, observe, and answer the question of, what role do I feel like I play in other people's eyes? And name that role. Are you the giver? Are you the rebel? Find a shape that goes with that role. What's it like to be that person? And then erase that for a moment and ask yourself, who is it that I feel like I am inside that might not be visible? Let's name that role. Let's talk about the attributes of that part of the self. And then maybe the third piece is then to ask oneself, who is it that I want to be? What role is that? What behaviors would I engage with if I could be that person?
That's really interesting because, you automatically think that you know who you are and how you're expressing yourself in the world. And there's another part of you that's deep within that you either don't acknowledge or don't put out in the world. So using that in an exercise, I think is really powerful. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So Jill, what tips can you offer for supporting children's emotional needs in this current environment? And can you help us understand what is the cognitive basis for arts helping to heal?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And I just saw a question come into the Q&A as well about mechanisms in trauma. And I'm going to let Joy talk about trauma because, of course, I'm not a therapist. I think about trauma in the public health purview of my work at a population level. But coming back to the beginning of your question, what tips? Again, sort of hearkening back to my own experience and my overall philosophy of the arts, it's just do it. Just do it. I think in the United States in particular, in our culture, we often stop doing the arts when we grow up if we're not particularly good at them. We kind of leave that to professionals and we feel like, oh, I'm not an artist, I can't do that. I did that with singing. Which has, been one of the most important parts of my well-being in the last year. So just do it, and in terms of our own kids and the kids that we work with, helping to counter that self-judgment and judgment of others, that hierarchy that we place on whether we're, good at it or not, because we know that just being creative, engaging in creative activities has health benefits, whether you're good at it or not. And of course, there's a whole other conversation about professional artists working in hospitals and the importance of actually being good when we bring professionals in, because we know that being subjected to things that we don't enjoy can actually increase our stress, right? So, but there's no limit to what we can do ourselves and with others, and the health benefits that we can yield from those activities. So just do it, intercept the judgment, just do it. And from a mechanisms perspective, it's such an interesting question. And I love that it's come up in our Q&A as well. One of the things that I think is really important is attention. We as human beings have limited cognitive capacity. We can only pay attention to so much at one time, as much as we try to multitask, which I do all day and realize the downsides of. But when we focus our attention in an arts activity, we know about flow state, being in that zone when we focus. We can't focus on the things that we're worrying about or the things that are troubling us. So when we're in a creative space, we can shift that attention. We can shift out of a stress response. When we're dealing with stressors, like many of us have been over the past year, we can live in a chronic fight or flight state, which really compromises the ability of our immune system to work. And if we can interrupt those cycles with pure enjoyment that we know the arts are good at, we can actually stimulate a relaxation response in the body. We also know that the arts are uniquely multimodal, as in a health or public health context, people would use the word intervention, but as a thing that we can do to change ourselves, the arts are uniquely multimodal. We can get physical, emotional, cognitive, social, and spiritual benefits all at the same time. It's an amazing package, and it's unique from other things that are good for us, like exercise even, because we can get all those benefits at the same time. I'll point you all, and I'll put it in the chat, Dr. Daisy Fancourt, who Karen, you mentioned in reference to the EpiArts lab, just published a paper in the Lancet, which is a highly regarded medical journal, where she identifies 600 mechanisms in which arts and cultural activities and leisure activities benefit our health. So if anybody's interested, I could put a link to that paper in the chat.
That would be great. And I love that you talked about, escape and focus, like the coloring book that I shared about how I'm using a coloring book to kind of, break away from that to-do list that I'm always chasing behind. And I think that, escaping and finding something that allows you to be laser focused is really powerful. So now I have another question that can go to the entire group, and that is just about, can you share a short story about how you have seen art make a positive transformation? Any examples? Or can you tell us about your early exposure to the arts? This is even a more important question for me, because I know we have a dancer and we have someone that's done drama. So what I want to know is, did your experience being in childhood have anything to do with the work you're doing today? Dancer, take the floor.
Well, so I'm going to tell another story of failure.
I don't believe that.
When I was in kindergarten, I took ballet classes, and the instructors wouldn't let me perform in the recital unless I came and did special alone practice with them. And I was really humiliated, as a 5-year-old. It didn't feel good to me. I don't know, I certainly didn't know the concept of humiliation specifically, but it didn't feel good to me. And so I got through the recital and I quit. And I actually didn't start. I then became a gymnast and turned to dance late in my junior year of high school. So I was relatively late coming to the art of dance. But again, my first experience wasn't really a positive one. I think that drive was in me, but it really got shut down for a very long time.
But you push through. So that's kind of your thing, I think. You go after things that aren't so easy or don't feel so great. What about Joy? I know that you've done a lot with drama, acting, theater. Is the experiences that you had as a child heavily weigh on the way and the direction of work that you do today?
Absolutely. I think 1,000% in ways that I'm not even aware of some of the time. I was a kid who I think was not quite a great fit in terms of my home family dynamic and many other things. And so I did start doing theater when I was young, and I heard this in the Daily Sun documentary. I heard the word like transcend. And I think that that's what performing and role taking and theater and music allowed me to do as a young person. It was to transcend all of those experiences. And
Escape again.
It's escape, but I also think it is experiencing a new and different kind of fully embodied reality. And it's like, well, wait a minute. In this reality, I feel confident. In this reality, I feel like I can be myself. And yes, so I think that that's probably the biggest influence of why years later and several careers later, I chose to pursue creative arts therapy work.
Great, thank you. And Gordon, I know that you are going on to get another master's degree, and I'm wondering if the written word has any influence on what you will get your degree in this dual program.
It has the written word has affected me in every direction I can think of, because it's like, for instance, right? I learned about literature. I was in my 20s, when I learned about literature and the power and drive it gave me. Like, the first two characters that I always like pretend that I am them was Oliver Twist and Pip from The Great Expectations. So these two characters always was like my motivation. Like, oh, they came from the struggle, but look what happened at the end. And so this is something that always pushed me forward. And I got into literary theory. And literary theory became my lens, how I begin to see life. And so everything I do has this lens now. So even though I'm going to social work and public health, I still reflect and see the world through these lenses that helps me identify different perspectives, because we know everything is connected in some way, but we always separate things based on the jargon, based on the discourse, based on the genre. But it's not always so. If you able to see things for what they really are, you can see connections to all. And so, like social work and public health, we always have this human factor that exists within both disciplines. And that human factor is what drives both. And so once you understand that human factor and how to relate to the psyche of the person, then you will understand that all things relate, and you can help them once you identify the key problem, which relates to how their psyche was affected by either their environment or some type of trauma. So therefore, you got to understand that all relates to each other, and you got to see the bigger picture.
Sure. Thank you so much. And there was a link that Jill, you were going to share. Is that something that you can post?
Yeah, I
in
put it in the chat. Mhm.
Okay. Oh, you did already?
Did.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so I think we can go to the Q&A and see what questions others might have that they'd like for you all to answer. So type answer. How can we convince administrative officials in jails and prisons to recognize the therapeutic power of the arts? As I've had many wardens say, theater, poetry, music is just an entertainment distraction. There just aren't a lot of data and studies to back this up. We need those.
Well, I know for one thing, right? There's some programs inside prisons. It's called rehabilitation through the arts. And what this program is geared to do is teach prisoners drama, teach them theater, and they have shows and performance, and also like Bard comes in with the orchestra and do musicals, classical musicals for the prisons. So there are certain situations where that already exists, and the power of those programs show through the individuals and the transition of their lives, and also their disciplinary records. So there is records and proof that show that the arts are helping people make these transitions. But what happened is they refuse to recognize it, because they know if people start to make a transition, then therefore their job security will now become something that becomes an issue. So this is the reason why there's always opposition to those aspects of those programs. But there is plenty of data to back up, these programs.
Great. The next question is a really great one. It says, I'm a performer with anxiety/depression issues and often hear about fight or flight. A third option is freeze. Any ideas on how to unfreeze when the just do it mantra doesn't work? Anyone want to take that one?
I mean, I think, I guess I can speak to it from a drama therapy perspective, but I think sometimes, actually from a therapeutic perspective, when we hear that just do it or like fake it till you make it, that can often cause more flight. What is it? Flight or freeze, the whole, whatever, that whole stress response, because it feels like it is just additional pick yourself up from a mind perspective. You should be able to have willpower over whatever the other things are that are happening in your body, in your heart, and in your soul. And so I would say perhaps the thing, this is to the person who asked the question, perhaps the thing to do is to stop in that moment when the I just need to keep going on pressure comes into your mind, and to almost take like a self time out and connect to breath and say, say something to yourself like, I'm with you. I feel you. I'm with myself right now. I support myself right now. What can I do to make myself feel a little more safe in this moment? Because I think the kinder we are to ourselves, the more we can give ourselves permission for that spaciousness, the more we're able to be in our expression, our creativity, our ease.
And I imagine too, it takes time. Like, I don't know if this person has dealt with this for a long period of time, or they're trying to break through in a new way now, but I certainly would imagine that when you're in those kinds of situations, breaking through is something that isn't easy, does take time.
Absolutely.
Great.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yes.
Thank you, whoever brought that up, because I've been trying to tell people for the longest there is a third response. That freeze is incredible. Like, and for me, I believe I call it the fear of the unknown. And so we get stuck at that moment where we want to, but we unsure of what actually exists on the other side. So therefore we stop everything. And I believe like the just do it mentality, it has to play a part. And this is something you have to tell yourself, like she just said, and just go about it. Because sometimes in order for us to find out what actually exists on the other side, we have to take that leap of faith. Because that leap of faith, it will determine where the outcome will land for us. And this is something that most of us don't want to do. We want to stay within the bounds of the universal. We don't want to take that leap of faith.
Right. And you know, the arts for art's sake is certainly something I think that anyone with us today will agree is not really the case. But do any of you all feel that as we get past this pandemic, that there will be a new trend towards engaging more art in our lives, whether it is, in formal setting or informal setting? What do you see on the horizon?
I'll start, Karen, and speak to that, because I really found it interesting early in the pandemic to see how the relationship between the arts and health seemed to be more widely recognized. I mean, people started singing from balconies and chalking driveways and doing driveway singing and, online dance parties. And I mean, from my perspective, and I'm really biased, of course, but it seemed like there was a big surge in people reaching to the arts to cope on their own, to find joy and to connect with other people, both from windows and balconies and driveways and online. And also, again, hearkening back to Daisy, she did a study in the UK. She started right at the beginning of COVID, before lockdown, and she had about 100,000 people who were completing surveys every single week. And she found about, I think it was 8 or 9 months in, she analyzed and found that 21.5% of people were doing art more than before the pandemic. So, it's interesting that I think people really have reached to the arts more. And I think, again, very biased perspective, that that the relationships between the arts and health have become clearer.
Fantastic. Thank you all for sharing. And I don't think we have any new questions, but let me double check.
Karen, can I add one thing to, I think it was Tara's question earlier?
Sure.
Very briefly. The question of evidence is a really interesting and important one in this space. I mean, I agree, more data is certainly needed, and there are people, gatekeepers, funders, decision makers who do respond to that kind of data. But I think it's really important that we recognize lots of ways of knowing. I mean, Gordon's poems are data. The stories and the lived experiences in this space are data. And so I think it's really important that we lift up these stories and that we lift up the voices and human experiences and sort of level out the overvaluation that, and I'm a researcher, you know, and I love research, but we overvalue data that is really complex, you know, and it's not always clear and it can be conflated. So I think there's it's a really important time for us to balance ways of knowing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have another question here, and is from Rhonda. Says, did some of the potential students try out for Annie feel turned off, negative by the idea of a virtual musical, or were they just as eager to be doing the play as if it were not fair?
Well, coming from the directing side and also being part of the Sitar administration, I can tell you that, you know, originally we were planning to do Annie. It was supposed to be on site in person. And obviously, you know, the pandemic crept up. You know, there were a couple of families that, you know, did not re-register when we let it be known that we were, you know, shifting to a virtual model. But that was really tended to be more for personal time and reasons. Overall, the majority of our cast members were, and their families were really, really just thrilled and happy and felt you know, engaged and valued. They were just so glad that, you know, we still did this
Right.
project with them. It was so vital to their experience during the summer, as you heard from the students in the documentary. So I would say the bulk of them still participated. We had about, I think, 30, 35 student and intern participants overall. Typically our cast is anywhere from maybe 40 to 50 members. So the number that we had online was quite high.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I have a couple of questions that have been added to the Q&A. I'll start with, I noticed that each of you use your art to interact with others. For example, Jill performs in public, Joy works with patients, and Gordon has the Wednesday review session. Can I do art at home alone and get emotional support? Singing alone seems lonely.
Oh, anybody? Okay. I'm waiting for one of y'all. There are groups out there that actually do like support art with others, and like poetry groups, you know, you have writing groups, but you can do art alone but not be lonely, because it's the outcome of your art and what you do with it. So therefore, once you create it, you now have something to put out to the world and let the world know that this art exists now. Because as somebody said, we need that other to understand and identify who we are. So it becomes art once it's out there and people now can relate to it, they feel it. And this is something you have to do, in my opinion.
I agree with that. Thank you so much. There's another question that says, it would be great to hear from Lorraine and Ellie about how to create the community aspect of the arts as a vehicle for healing. They came over and over in the documentary, and it isn't easy to create.
Wow. Well, first off, you know, we are fortunate at Sitar that Sitar already is a community. And so we had a strong connection with our student body, and we had a large number of continuing and returning students that were part of the project. That's one of the reasons why I felt confident that we should go ahead with this virtual musical, because I knew we had some strong participants that we needed to carry the show on with and for. So we had a base of community already. However, we also had a dynamic team of artists, teaching artists working with us and that's part of our program design, even when we're on site, but that are giving students support throughout the whole learning process of putting on the show. So both, on stage, so to speak, as well as helping them with their acting practice and acting skill building when they're off screen, and even giving them socio-emotional support because, working in drama and other things, emotions bubble up, and then also we're all human, we're people, and we're learning how to just work together as well. So, theater's a natural art form in which to build community. It really was a community effort to build that community and continue what was already in place on site, and then just learn how to do it through the virtual landscape.
Thank you. And Ellie hasn't said anything yet. I would love for her to maybe respond to that question as well. Ellie?
Yeah, thank you all so much. I've been really enjoying this conversation. So, I am a filmmaker, but I'm also a mother of 2 little boys who have attended the magic of Miss Sylvia's classes at Sitar. I've also been a teaching artist for years at Sitar, so really know and have felt firsthand how Sitar creates this safe space, this brave space where people are really encouraged to be who they are. And I think Isis really just hit home for me at the end when she said, that encourages me to be well. And talk about healing. I will never, ever forget that moment, which was the first thing I had filmed after lockdowns. We just emerged and I hadn't done any filming. And Lorraine called me and said, it's on. We are capturing this virtual musical. And I was like, yes, I will be there. And I showed up, and I'll never forget, following Layla, Stephanie, as they found out their roles, and just like full body, like their reaction. And it was hard to hold my composure. I wanted to jump for joy and give them a hug, even though I couldn't. And even though I couldn't even see their mouth, their eyes were just beaming with that, that feeling of connection that they were going to be seen and heard, and that, people have talked about it in this conversation, but that ability to play, we all need to play. And Sitar just nourishes that, and it gives young people an ability to choose. I think a number of folks have talked about how young people can feel boxed in or not seen, and all of a sudden, again, going back to Isis, is she can choose who she'll be herself, but she could also play all these roles and step out of herself for a bit. And it was really magical to witness that transformation.
And I think for me, the tears started right when they saw which roles they'd won. And if I had had the camera, it would have been like, oh. So kudos to you for keeping the camera straight in those moments. There is another question, and it says, do you see a spiritual connection with the arts? And if so, how?
I'd be happy to start us off here. I think the arts and spirituality are inseparable, and we see that in our human history. Every, almost place of worship and spiritual practice in the world is at least aestheticized, even if it's in nature. But when you think about temples and churches and holy places, they are places of beauty. And I think that's because human beings have long recognized that when we engage in aesthetic experiences and in the arts, we transcend, we self-transcend. It shifts the way, our conceptual boundaries shift, and it also shifts us into a space where we're more able to connect with ourselves, with one another, with the spirit realm. So we shift. And that's the power of the arts. And I think human beings have always known that, and it's been a part of spiritual practice.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. And we're coming close to the end of our time. So I just wanted to say that I invite and encourage all of you to get involved with Sitar Arts Center. You're now part of our family. Please consider volunteering, advising, or donating. And if you're interested in helping us grow, you can get in touch with Essence, who sent you the invites. You have her email address, and she will coordinate getting you engaged with our organization. So hopefully everybody feels that. I also wanted to say that, you know, there are so many things that I picked up. I mean, like I'm writing notes about different things that were said, so many repeated things. So the highlights to me that stood out were that, you know, we all need to take chances, find a place to escape where you can focus and really free your mind and come into a better space. Try something new, breathe. I think the children said the most, they really touched me with a lot of the things that they said that I repeated, from, you know, hard work, great results. I got this. And I think that we should all leave feeling empowered, and that art is not for art's sake, and that our minds do go far beyond the combined space that we're all in right now. So if nothing else, a book can help you go to a brand new place.
Mhm.
So I thank you all. And I guess that's it for us this evening. If no one else has anything they want to comment on. Well, thank you guys. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great night.
You too.